Here's the thing we're going to kick off with tonight. We talked about this tomorrow night about the Waitangi Tribunal releasing confidential briefings around acts, submissions and ideas around how to define the treaty. And we thought, we don't know a thing about this. Who are we? So let's get an expert on. So joining us right now is a lawyer who has appeared before the Waitangi Tribunal doing claims for iwi and various arguments and stuff. It's Moana Tuwhare, a friend of the show, been with us before. Kia ora and welcome to the show again, Moana. How are you?
Kia ora, I'm good, thank you.
Lovely to have you with us on this auspicious night of lots of fun going to happen as we go through the evening.
I'm up for some fun.
Now, you're someone who obviously has been involved with the tribunal. You've been around it. You've argued in front of it as a lawyer. And you've said to us before the show, you've got the confidential document open in front of you. What are you able to just to tell us? Oh, I was going to say, maybe, actually, no, sorry. This is terrible of me. Let's do this slightly differently. Let's just play a bit of the story first of all, because that'll set it up for us. And then we want to come back to you and see what you know and have heard about these, about the events that the story talks about. Let's start there. Here we go.
A Waitangi Tribunal inquiry this month was showing confidential policy briefings from officials to ministers, briefings the tribunal has since made public. David Seymour, who's in charge of the work, says it should be up to the government to decide when that happens.
I just think it's more respectful to the people in a democracy that the government they elected is actually able to get on with the job instead of someone unelected sticking.
I do like how he's trying to pull the respectful card, Chewy. Like how he's being, you should be respectful to us as we're being the most disrespectful we possibly can be to you by doing this kind of horse shit.
Their oar in.
The policy is still being developed, but the briefings were based on principles proposed by ACT. Importantly, the principles mention the rights of all New Zealanders, not just Māori.
What sort of successful society do you have when one group have political rights that the rest don't have?
Like people over 18 voting? Just saying, it's like there's one group, Chewy, over 18s that have a political right that a whole bunch of others don't. Just spitballing, just throwing some ideas out there.
That's not equality, and that's not democracy.
That interpretation raised eyebrows. In a December briefing to Justice Minister Paul Goldsmith, officials said ACT's principles differ significantly from current understandings within the Crown, Courts and Waitangi Tribunal.
Yeah, but who are they?
Relating to Article 2 appears to be a novel interpretation with no support of it in any legislation or expert opinion.
Now, just remember, that was National. That was National saying that to their coalition partner.
I would go a step further than that and say some of these are closer to a fabrication.
There are people who have different views, but I think that's healthy. My view is that the treaty gives the same rights to all New Zealanders.
Seymour wants the policy to spark a national conversation about the treaty, but the briefing said it's unlikely to facilitate the type of national conversation that will help address uncertainty and apprehensions. And there was a substantial risk it could generate further division, which poses a threat to social cohesion and trust in institutions.
So it's not the idea of a conversation itself that is a worry, it's the fact that the particular conversation being proposed just is detached from realities.
When you politely and respectfully debate our future, that actually leads to greater understanding.
The document shows Seymour later told officials that ACT's principles were just a starting point, but he won't give away their current
That's
shape.
Pretty terrifying.
Despite the Waitangi Tribunal effectively leaking this, I do still have to be respectful of my cabinet colleagues.
Not wanting to give away too much, even if others have.
So there you go. There's the story. There's the introduction for us, Moana, to talking about. I find that quite terrifying that ACT says this is just the beginning, but they won't say what's coming next. Now, you're deep in this, right? You've got the document. You're hearing the submissions. Tell us what we need to know.
Love to. Well, first of all, just in relation to the Waitangi Tribunal's process, and I just want to point out that I'm not currently a practicing lawyer, haven't appeared in front of the tribunal for 3.5 at least years. But in a former life, I spent 19 years regularly appearing in front of the tribunal. And it is their standard process to put documents onto their website. So it's a public forum. It's available to anybody to get the link to view it remotely if you want to. You can't be physically at the hearing, but you want to appear in front of the tribunal, either, like we are now, or and the whole, every single document that gets filed, unless there has been a direction that it will be maintained under confidentiality, it gets put onto the website, onto the record of inquiry, and then onto the website, and anyone from the public can access it.
So Seymour's playing games. So obviously there was no instruction to keep it confidential, and we just followed due process.
That's their standard process for everything that's not confidential. In relation to this particular document, it's a cabinet paper that's marked confidential, and the tribunal made a determination about whether or not that meant that it would be kept confidential for the inquiry purposes. And initially it was meant to be confidential to only the parties in the inquiry. But then it became available to everybody, and in part, in my view, I actually watched the whole of the proceeding, the 2-day hearing that took place, and listened and went back and re-listened to parts of it because it was extraordinary, actually, and it made me have a little reminisce about being a lawyer representing claimants, because you do get a whole bunch of information that you might not ordinarily get to be privy to, and watching it from a bit of a fly on the wall perspective, it was fascinating, and it was very plain and clear to me that what was in the cabinet paper was being referred to over the live link in questions and answers between the tribunal members and the various Crown witnesses that were appearing before the tribunal. And the Crown witnesses, high senior officials, the Secretary for Justice, the top of the Te Tiriti, the Crown Department for Crown Māori Relations, they were all very forthcoming and very obliging in terms of being frankly and honestly answering the tribunal's questions, and obviously questions about the not so much the cabinet paper or its existence, but the contents of it around the Treaty Principles Bill were being asked. So a lot of what was in the paper was already available to the public, if that makes sense, prior to this going onto the website. Anyway, the judge has determined that it wasn't in the public interest to keep it confidential, and that they were going to publish it onto the tribunal's website, like they do with all their documentation.
So just for clarity, that means it's gone through the correct process to be released to the public, because the way Seymour's selling it is like, how dare they release this privileged information who shouldn't have? But it's gone through due process to be released.
It's gone through a due process, and the judge has made a determination based on it's in the public interest that this stuff is available to the public.
Yeah.
And Crown Law has gone back to them and said, well, we don't agree with you on that, but we're not going to judicially review you. We're just going to let it lie.
Right.
So, they were aware that was happening. The Crown, representing government's interests, has responded to that, and that's where it sits. But the document is public, and as a result of that, of the judges, the chief judge, I should add, the chief judge of the Māori Land Court, was the presiding officer for this particular hearing. And she's made a determination, and now we have it in front of us. But fundamentally what it is that the cabinet paper refers to advice to cabinet, basically, just highlighting what to expect in relation to the Treaty Principles Bill. It points out that it's likely to be controversial. It points out that the bill will define the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi in statute, and that the policy intention is to create some certainty about what the principles are and how they are applied in New Zealand law. And it goes on to say that the bill will basically set out a finite number of principles. It sets out three principles, which will basically replace the principles which have been articulated by the courts in the Waitangi Tribunal and the government over the years. So interesting advice given, not just in this particular document. The fact of its confidentiality is kind of a side issue. The main point is that every single advisor on this bill has pointed out how contentious this is, how it doesn't actually align with anything remotely representing an interpretation of the treaty, and that it's just kind of it doesn't go as far as saying it's bizarre, but certainly many other witnesses have, been scratching their head around how you even arrive at the position that ACT arrives in terms of its interpretation of what the principles should be.
I'm looking at an article here that talks about it, and it says the treaty principles were a, quote, novel interpretation of Te Tiriti with a backing of no expert opinion, and that the proposed legislation could pose a threat to social cohesion. So it sounds like when Seymour was basically saying, any public conversation and discourse is good, it's almost like saying, yeah, no, because if like one side is saying, smoking is really good for your lungs, we should have a debate about that, and the other side is going, yeah, no, it's not good necessarily always to have equal and opposite be given that level of 50-50, and this certainly doesn't seem to be that, but Seymour seems to be selling it as this is great for democracy because we all get to have our say, but you're trying to tell us that smoking is good for your lungs.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that it's not good when it's harmful, and the smoking example is exactly the same thing. This context, this is harmful. So a lot of the witnesses during the inquiry were saying things. So these are some of the quotes of some of the key witnesses. That if passed, it will represent one of the worst and most flagrant breaches of Te Tiriti or Waitangi in modern history. It's alarming and inaccurate. It's violence to the text of the treaty. It's hurtful, it's reckless, because one small party has made it the price for government being formed, and it's a complete redefinition. It bears little resemblance of what the treaty actually says, and that's both versions of the treaty, the English or the Māori. It doesn't matter which text you go to, it doesn't resemble it. So like having an opportunity to debate something as fundamentally as important as the founding constitutional document of the country, absolutely that in of itself is a good thing, but debating it on the basis of an interpretation that has no founding in logic or fact or legal interpretation or even consistency with other ways in which laws are debated, it's just bizarre. It really is bizarre. So you just wonder, the only kind of planet in which David Seymour's version of, this is good that we're having a debate is kind of a planet that would send most of the rest of us to an institution with white padded walls and straitjackets. It doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense, particularly because of the harmful effect that it's having in relation to Crown Māori relationship. It really does, for Māori, feel to us like an attack, and not just a benign kind of, poke the bear kind of thing. It's a real fundamental attack on our ability to be ourselves, to operate in our cultural paradigm in accordance with our values and our systems. And because I think David Seymour's version of equality is that we should all be like good white people.
Yeah, like him.
Yeah, like him. And that equal rights under the law means that everybody gets treated the same, regardless of, who you are, where you're from, what you believe in. But actually that gives us no room at all for diversity in the way we operate, diversity in the way we constitute our systems of any system really, and or our cultural norms. And for Māori, we've fought so long and hard to get to a point where the kind of colonial mindset of treating Māori as though we're some kind of inferior and barbaric that needed to be, race that needed to be assimilated into a Western system. We really thought that was over, and that we'd gone. It's so last century. It's so 2 centuries ago. So it really does feel like a full-on attack, and these references and warnings to disruption to social cohesion, and the various other ways that it's been put. That's real. That's real.
This idea, and you just said it. I've been saying this for 15 years, doing talkback, all that kind of stuff. When anyone always says, like people are saying about migrants, whatever, they need to assimilate. We all need to be the same. What they're saying is, be like me, be like us. Right. When you be like us, we can all be the same. No one ever goes, we can be like you. No one ever says that, which actually is a really healthy position to take as well. But the other thing that people who say you should be like us is they never open the door. There's that adage of, if you want someone to come into your community, into your house, then normally you have to open the door and say, come on in, come to a party. They don't do that. They just stare and look over the road and say, look at them not being like us. And the other thing, obviously, that this is always ironic with Mr. Seymour, is the only place he wants us all to be the same is in the category of race. Like there's no other category he's fighting for equality. I made that flippant point. We've got to be all the same when we're voting, well, except for those who are under 18, because he doesn't want to make it a level playing field when it comes to discrimination by age. He doesn't want to make it a level playing field in any other protected class. It's only race, which is that, when you stop and think about it, is the most horrible part of this insidious smiling face. Just be respectful and have a good old conversation about subjugating those brown people again. It's just horrible.
It is. It's really creepy. It is kind of entertaining, except for the fact that it is actually really fundamentally ugly and harmful. And the other thing too that he's trying to do is, so the second principle that he wants to rewrite out of the 3 that will be supposedly make up this bill, is that all New Zealanders will have the right to Tino Rangatiratanga. So that's a guarantee to Māori. That right will now belong, if this was passed, would now be a right of all New Zealanders, Māori or non-Māori alike. But what he doesn't, he just completely fails to understand what Tino Rangatiratanga means in a Māori paradigm. So you can't take Tino Rangatiratanga out of a Māori worldview. It's fundamentally a Māori concept for how we organise ourselves, how we behave, our value system, everything that's wrapped up in that very, very important set of words is just completely over the top of his head. Like for example, collective property. Like Tino Rangatiratanga assumes that there's collective owned assets that, so is what he's saying.
It's a bit socialist, Moana. It's a bit socialist, isn't it? We don't like that doing. Hey.
Is he telling his voters and his constituents that that's what they're up for if they want to all have rights to Tino Rangatiratanga? Like seriously, are they all prepared to transfer their individually owned assets into a sort of collective basket? I mean, maybe he's not. Maybe he might be onto something there.
Yeah, you're selling it. Maybe Seymour's onto something here, Moana. You're selling it. I reckon there's something in there.
Well, I just think he just completely has skewed what that term actually even means. Because he sells it on the basis of all New Zealanders should have a right to partnership. And well, if that's the case, the government can partner with any part of its constituency at any point it wants on any issue, right? They don't need to use the treaty to have a partnership with the Muslim community or anyone else that they want to have a partnership with. They just don't need to touch the treaty to do that. So it's just rubbish. It's just it's a beat up. It's an actual beat up. And the other thing I want to point out, though, is Pat and Chui, is that The Treaty Principles Bill, has got the most media attention, but actually the hearing was about the review of the current legislative clauses, or the references in legislation at the moment, which refers to the treaty. Now that's a New Zealand First coalition agreement, policy, in which has formed part of the coalition agreement. And that is also a very insidious piece of reviewing and rewriting of the treaty that's on our horizon, that's getting much less attention. And but the hearing was about both things. But that review is further down the track. So there's about 50 pieces of law in New Zealand that have references to the treaty. And all of those are up for cancelling, effectively.
Chewy, mate, you've been sitting there for a bit just hanging. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I've got so much thoughts. I love the fact that Seymour has been basically downtrowed by this nefarious, what would we call it? Openness and transparency. I mean, obviously, it's something that he never ever expected. So it's great. I think when it comes to what Seymour has done, we pointed out on the show last year that it was going to be really important that we kept it real as far as what he's trying to do. He's not trying to change the treaty. He's trying to change the laws around the treaty. He's going to nibble at the boring legal framework for it. And when people come after him and say, oh, you're trying to get rid of the treaty. No, I'm not. Honestly, not. Just going to make it basically impossible for anybody to refer to it under law. All of this nonsense. As you pointed out, I think when it comes to Tino Rangatiratanga, he is really capitalizing on people's ignorance.
Yeah.
Whether that's willful ignorance or just from racism and bigotry of what Tino Rangatiratanga is. And a lot of people think that it is some sort of, Māori set up their own second government and can set all their own laws and they can take everything and all of this sort of stuff. And that's not it at all. And I think if there's any benefit to come out of this horrible shit show, is that there would be more discussion about what the treaty actually means and why we shouldn't be scared of it. But that my fear is that it is going to be an ugly way to get there. And I think when people are coming out, when Seymour's saying, from a point of respect, I think the most respectful language I've seen is how they've referred to it. It's a complete nonsense what he's talking about. It's not based on anything. Oh, it's a novel interpretation. It's a lovely way to say what you've come up with here is batshit insane. Nobody agrees with you, and you are going to affect the social, the social cohesion of the entire country. Fucking hell. Yeah, I don't think he's wrong. Like we've talked all the way is like this will get people into the streets.
I think it's really I think it's really important though, and we'll keep doing this here, is to remember this, no matter who's talking about it, whether it's Peters or Peters or Seymour or whatever, this lands at the feet of Luxon, because without Luxon opening the door and just being so power hungry that he would have to agree to everything. Remember what we've been saying this year, Moana, is, if Luxon opens the door, whatever breaks, he owns. And so I think it's really important to actually put back on his feet. Yeah, it might be act policy or act principle, but we wouldn't be having this debate that could tear the country in two, Mr. Luxon, if you hadn't opened this door for these lunatics.
Yeah, absolutely. And as part of the tribunal inquiry, they had to join, the connection from it being a policy that you can attribute to a political party, through to the coalition agreement, through to directions of the government, of cabinet.
Yeah.
So cabinet has authorised this. cabinet now is responsible for, you know, the decisions that it makes. So absolutely, it's at Luxon's table, and this government needs to be held accountable for effectively allowing the tail to wag the dog. Like, these are minority parties, and they are just completely the upheaval and that this is creating, and it's not just this; it's the fast track bill, it's the you know, the removal of the Section 7AA clause out of Oranga Tamariki. It's, you know, all sorts of things. It's just every time you look at the news, or every time I look at the news, is just, you know, the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and it's scary because it is unbridled power, and the whole point of this so-called democracy that they want to, you know, wax lyrical that they somehow are the only ones trying to uphold, is that actually the way in which they are abusing their power is not based, in my view, on democratic principles, and I really think that they need to be held to account for that. Everybody, I think this country deserves better. I think there needs to be some kind of baseline ability, you know, IQ and at least literacy skills to even be able to run as an MP, quite frankly, given what we're experiencing. Because like anyone that can read that his, you know, that David Seymour's interpretation is just kind of whack.
Maybe that's the problem. ACT supporters can't read. Maybe that's what it is, Chewy.
Oh, it just makes sense. Except if you want to just you know.
Just a thought I've had, like, when we look at the amount of time that Luxon has spent out of the country, do we really expect him to have an understanding of what the treaty is and how important it is? I mean, it's not like ACT have sprung this on him. It was an active part of the negotiations.
Yeah.
So is he like, yeah, most New Zealanders won't give a shit about this. This won't cause us any problems at all.
Yeah,
and
maybe.
It's kind of like a, oh shit moment, or does he not care? Like, this government has been just on an assault of everything to create any sort of redress or breathing room for Māori is somehow on the chopping block. The language has changed. You know, we talk about the submissions for that sort of thing. That's the next one that I want to talk about. They have given us more than a couple of weeks to make submissions on this, so that's good. We've been urging our followers to actually take the time to make submissions on this, just as something to indicate what people's feelings are on it. And Seymour and his ilk have always wanted to couch what they're doing in friendly terms, like, oh, it's about equality and that sort of thing. You know, they co-opt this language of inclusiveness to create something that will erase a culture or dilute it or diminish it. It's not a question of supremacy unless it's European supremacy.
Yeah.
It's just bananas. And we've made such progress, and it's been at such cost. So many people afford it. I think we owe it to people to really stick our flag in this and go, no, we don't accept this. This is not what was voted for. Your ACT represents a fraction of the voting base. And the things that they're getting across the line are so outside of their potential influence. It's just remarkable how bad this is.
It is remarkable, and it concerns me that it's not just, I mean, we like to pick on ACT because I think, you know, David, you know, is particularly up for it. But to be quite frank, Shane Jones has come out with some absolutely outrageous statements recently in relation to, the fast track bill, and we're going to bulldozer over the frogs and all of the rest of it. Various statements in which he is alluding to there will be no Māori or iwi groups going to hold up development of the country and things like that. So the New Zealand First is very much riding this wave. And I think what they're out of touch with, though, like in my day job, I basically teach cultural capability and treaty training to corporates and private organisations. And the uptake is huge, and the number of people out there in all sorts of organisations, ones that you would, not necessarily assume were that willing to engage in discussions around what the treaty means for ordinary New Zealanders in our everyday lives. And these are going from, boards, governing boards, to executive leadership teams, right through, staff. And in some organisations, it's 10,000 staff we're accessing. And actually, these guys are completely out of touch with what average New Zealand would like to see in relating to treaty-based race relations. They're absolutely out of touch. And Luxon, if he doesn't know that, you're going to be in for a short, sharp shock at the next election.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll wait and see. Hey, Moana, it's been fantastic having you back here. Thanks so much for making time to come on live. Is there anything in the chat there that we're going to throw out now? Because there's lots of people talking about the conversation we're having. Like, for example, I'm not going to get to everybody's. We'll get to all of them later on. Here we go. Kiwi says, thank you for the super chat. David Seymour wanted more government transparency when he was campaigning. Now that he's in power, he doesn't want it. He's a hypocrite. Peter says, thanks for the super chat. Novel interpretation sounds like Sir Humphrey's euphemism for pants on head. Insane. And Amy says, we'll just do three of them. Amy says, the behavior of this government has so far been embarrassing and so disappointing. It actually hurts on such a deeper level. These conversations and opinions have hit hard. It's spiritual. It's guttural. Amy, I'm so sorry for you. Thank you for your super chat. And thank you for joining us tonight, Moana. It's been amazing.
Awesome. Always a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Cheers, Ian.